All right, let's talk about something we can all unfortunately relate to, and that is stress. I'll hopefully destroy a couple of myths about stress, then we'll talk about the symptoms and types of stress, and then I'll try to give you some tips I've learned from different songs over the year on how to manage stress. So first of all, let's make sure we know that not all stress is bad. Some stress is good. When you think about things in life that mean something to you, things that are challenging, stress can actually be a good motivating factor. But most of the time when we think about stress, that's not what we're thinking about. So for our intents and purposes, we will focus on what I call the negative stress, the stress that's unwanted. Now, stress is not just an emotional experience either. Stress can be very physical. Oftentimes in my classes will ask my students to think about the situations that make them stressful and to feel like what their body is experiencing at those times. Sometimes we get headaches from stress, sometimes we get upset stomachs from stress. If you know me, you know I love food, so if I'm stressed out to the point where I can't eat, I'm really stressed out, but it happens. And then finally, we also can have increased blood pressure, which obviously is not a good thing, particularly if it's a constant in our lives. But again, sometimes just giving a speech in front of the class, you can have that increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure. So stress is a physical thing in addition to being an emotional thing. But for us, we're really going to talk about the emotions. I can't really do a lot to help your upset stomach. But what I can do, hopefully, is give you some suggestions on how to deal with stress. But let's talk about 3 types before we do that. There's actually a lot of different ways to categorize stress, but we're going to do so in terms of the severity and the duration of their symptoms. So the first type of stress is acute stress, not acute stress, acute stress. That just means that it's a brief experience. So currently, as I'm recording this, we are in the path of Tropical Storm Hermione, and yes, I'm calling it Hermione because you can't name something so close to a Harry Potter character and take a letter out. So Tropical Storm Hermione is currently causing problems for me. Now, that's a pretty brief situation. It's been pretty stressful. I've had to do some things at work to kind of take care of the situation in case things get bad. My dog is freaking out. So there's a little bit of stress in my life. But this is acute stress. It's really not that big of a deal, and it's hopefully going to go away soon. But if it doesn't, it may become acute episodic stress, the second type. So this refers to brief situations, but those that recur. So if I lived in a magical part of the world that had tropical storms and hurricanes every week, that would become acute episodic stress. Fortunately, that doesn't happen, but let's say at your job, a new coworker comes in, and this coworker is really difficult to work with. And so now you have this recurring moments of stress in your life that's kind of starting to form a pattern, and that can be acute episodic stress. Let's say that coworker firmly plants their feet at your job, and for years they make your existence stressful. Well, now we have a chronic stressor, the third and final type. So this is when the stress has never gone away, and it's just unfortunately become a constant in your life. So obviously, the longer the stress occurs, the more impacting the symptoms can be, especially if it's having physical consequences. So, doom and gloom, now let's actually talk about some things you can do to handle stress. These are actually 7 suggestions that I've taken from different songs throughout my life that have helped me manage stress, and so I hope they do the same for you. The first is to understand that we all get stress. Sometimes it feels like no one can understand what we're experiencing, but all you have to do is talk to somebody and you'll find out that we all feel overwhelmed at times. Knowing that kind of normalizes those sensations and makes it feel okay. The second is asking for help. Particularly if you're an independent person or someone who doesn't like to ask for help, this can be difficult. But if your life, whether it's brief or chronic, has occurred in such a way that you feel overwhelmed, that it's become stressful, it's okay to ask people to help you out, whether or not it's to help you with specific tasks or whether or not it's just to talk about what's going on. But that requires the third step, which is to actually open up. Now you're wondering maybe, how does that differ from asking for help? Well, sometimes we ask for help and then we just assume that the other person knows what to do and we'll do it. But we really have to be willing to be vulnerable, to admit what it is we're struggling with. Sometimes we want to have this image that we're successful at everything. We don't like to admit our weaknesses. But not being able to handle an inordinate amount of stress is not a weakness, that's a human thing. So we have to open up and be willing to share what it is that's stressing us out. The fourth is to find an outlet for it. Now, obviously, music is my outlet, but maybe yours is sports, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's reading books. But there's some way that you express your stress, you express those feelings, but then you have a way to get that energy out into the world. But you got to be careful, because the fifth tip is to let it go. Now, you just said express it, Wes. What's the deal? Well, sometimes we can sit with those negative emotions and sit with the stress, and it becomes a part of our life. And so we don't ever figure out how to let those feelings go. If it's an acute situation, find a solution, find a way to deal with it. If it's not, find a way to manage the stress, find a release. But to just constantly express and sit there in the midst of those negative feelings, that can be a lot of the time what leads to all of these physical symptoms and even the emotional ones. So you have to sometimes come to peace with whatever it is. It's not always easy to do, but you have to find a way to do that. One thing that can help is my sixth suggestion, and that is to try to find the positives. This is a pretty big part of psychology. Sometimes when we have clients come to us for counseling, we would love to be able to take the stress out of their lives, but we can't do that. Life is really tough sometimes. Sometimes all we can do is change their perception. Perception is such a powerful word. So if we can help them find the positive in a situation, whether it's a way they can grow, whether it's something to look forward to once the situation passes, you've got to find a way to navigate the difficult situations and change your perception, your perspective on the stress. If you can do that and make it positive, then you can really be successful in overcoming it. And once you do that, then you get the seventh suggestion, which actually helps you continue your stressful battles for the rest of your life. Because the seventh suggestion is to build confidence. Once you have confidence in asking for help, in expressing yourself in an outlet and letting it go, you can just start to say, I've done this before. I did this last week. I did it 2 weeks ago, so I can keep doing it. So the more stressful reactions that you are successful in achieving, the more you can build this confidence and handle stress successfully.